Okay, welcome to the Leadership Talk Show. I'm your host, Victor Vogel, and we are also on Facebook Live. So, just so you know that, you can leave your comments on there. Won't be able to see them because I'm in the middle of the show, and that's done on a PowerPoint screen sharing program here on Zoom. So, if you really want to participate with me directly, you really need to click on that link that I left in the Facebook comments and go ahead and sign up as a participant and join the show with me. And then you can ask questions and I can respond to your questions as I see them pop up here on the screen. So I don't see anybody signed up right now. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and leap into the program. I do have a poll that I can issue, and I'll do that a little bit later if some folks come on the air. Otherwise, we'll just go on through this program. So uh, if you want to attend any of my leadership talk shows, I post registrations to these shows far in advance, or as far as I can in advance. Usually it's about a week, maybe longer in some cases. If I do a special, it may be shorter. But anyway, you can register by finding the show on my Facebook page, Leadership Lost or Evolving. And I'll also probably share that on my timeline for my friends that don't go to Leadership Lost or Evolving. Uh, Also on LinkedIn, I post these in advance on my LinkedIn page, which you can find me at the standardlinkedin.com/in/contract with Vic. And on Twitter, it's at Vic Leadership, VIC Leadership, at Vic Leadership. And if you want to be a guest with me where we get on live and we talk live, then you can email me at the Leadership Talk Show at gmail.com. And so if you kind of slip and can't get to any of these links or lose them, just remember the Leadership Talk Show at gmail.com. Email me and I'll go ahead and email you out an invitation to attend as an attendee. Now, if you're attending as an attendee, I have chat turned off and I do have questions and answers available. So you have the option to type in a question and I'll stop periodically if I see those pop up. And we'll try to respond to any questions we might have throughout the program. Otherwise, I'll walk through the webinar here based on what we're talking about, and that's kind of how that goes. There is no, the attendees to the program don't have the option of video and audio input, only the panelists or the guest have those rights along with myself. So that's sort of how the program works tonight. Tonight, we have something I consider really, really special. It's artificial intelligence. Now, we'll talk about leadership. There's so much out there today about leadership. It's pretty amazing, but very little about kind of forward looking. Most of it's like, how can you be a better leader? What can you do to improve your leadership style? What do companies look for in leadership and that kind of thing. This is a little more forward looking. This is something that's cutting edge right now. Not a lot of companies in it right now, and we'll talk about that in just a second. You'll see why. But it is definitely going to have a significant impact on leadership and how leadership operates and how leadership interacts with artificial intelligence. Now, most people tend to think artificial intelligence is along the lines of Siri, and that is true. But a lot of this is more mechanical. automation than it is artificial intelligence. So that's something that I want to help try to clarify. So let me just kind of cover what I would like you to see in this particular program. And if there's something you want to talk about or a question you want me to answer or respond to, you can put it in the comments section on Facebook, or you can put them in the comment section on the repost of this on YouTube, blogs. It goes to Apple iTunes as a podcast, a video podcast. And I send it out to a lot of places to be reviewed. So just put your comments in there, and then I will try to get back to you with information relatives. Now, I am going to be showing you some experts, and if somebody, when you I send out a request for anybody that's doing research in this area, and it becomes obvious to me that this is an area that not very many people are involved in from a leadership perspective right now. There are very few folks around there that even can explain what AI is. So I've gone and done quite a bit of research, and I found some symposiums that have been going on around the world where AI was addressed, and AI was addressed in some cases in talks, like TED Talks and leadership and stuff. And I picked out some I thought might respond to the following points. What is artificial intelligence really? Let's try to get our arms around what we're talking about when we say artificial intelligence. What impact could artificial intelligence have on what's expected of leaders in the upcoming years versus what we're kind of expecting now out of leaders? And there is a change. There's going to be a pretty dynamic change in all of this in the future. How will leaders survive in the world of AI? So let's begin with the first one. What is artificial intelligence?
So what is AI? AI is a discipline that has been with us for many decades, at least since the 1950s when the term was coined. Within the field of artificial intelligence, we have a subfield called machine learning. Within machine learning, we have another subfield of neural networks. And within neural networks, there's a specific technology called deep learning, which I'm sure you all have at least heard about it being spoken, that really has become sort of at the heart and at the core of a lot of the excitement that has happened over the last 5 years. AI is not equal to deep learning. AI is a much bigger thing. However, one could be forgiven for believing that AI equals deep learning in the last 4 or 5 years. So I want to tell you a little bit to demystify what is it, so you have a feeling for what is that technology. But I'll remind you that the field itself is larger than that. Oops, I think I did that. The origins of this is actually a native of Navarra, right? Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who is the father of modern neuroscience. And he did really seminal work in the absolutely gorgeous diagrams that he created. In addition to being a fantastic scientist, he was also a great artist and illustrator. And he was among the first to really push and understand the idea that in our brain we have neural networks. And that we have these cells that you see here, that the neurons have axons, that the intersection of axons forms synapses, and that those synapses are at the very heart of things like memory and learning. With no more than that biological inspiration, in the 1940s, a mathematical abstraction was created, and that was the notion of, instead of just of a neural network, of an artificial neural network. And diagrams like this, maybe with less layers, I'll explain that in a second, start to emerge, and these algorithms were created. What they represent, the way you read a structure like that, is the circles represent the neurons, quote unquote. The layers, you read it from left to right. As you add layers and you go to the right, those are the network component of those neurons. In this case, I'm showing a fully connected neural network. Every neuron is connected to every other neuron in the layer above it. And the lines in between represent the synapses, which are, in our context of the algorithm, they are the weights. That is what we're trying to learn. We're trying to learn, when we say we're learning, we're trying to learn how strong should that connection be between pairs of neurons. And then there's a nonlinear function that gets embedded into each neuron such that if the right things happens, the neuron triggers. And when they trigger, they send the signal upwards. The way an algorithm like this works is that you train it by example. So in this case, if I want to be able to recognize the pictures of those representations of animals, and let's say I input one of them is a dog. At the beginning of it, I don't know the weights of my neural network. I just don't know anything about it, right? So what happens is I send it in, and I ask it, fundamentally it's a classifier. Is that a dog or not? And it says, no, it's not a dog. And let's say the input was a dog. So I say, bad network, right? You've done a bad job. So I send a signal that goes now from right to left, and I change the weights. And I give it another example. I say, here's another picture of a dog. And this time it gets it right. So this time I don't change the weights. And I do this again and again and again. And humans have to label that example. So the notion that even today things like deep learning automatically learn is not correct. Lots and lots of humans label by hand what's a dog, what's not a dog. But the beauty of the neural network is that once it learns from those examples that a human has labeled, it can generalize. And when you give it examples that it's never seen, it gets it right. That's what's called supervised machine learning. And there's a field of something called unsupervised machine learning, which aims to learn without classification, without labels. Just a 1 second intuition I would like to give you is that, this is a little bit more technical. Take this problem. Imagine you have a set of dots, maybe they represent customer classes, whatever it may be, or people you want to give credit or not credit to. And you need to figure out with a single line, right, a plane, how to separate those two dots, the dark dots and the light ones. You can see that on the example on the left, you cannot do it, right? You would have to draw a circle or something like that to be able to isolate the darker dots. But you can do a trick, which is to increase the dimensionality of the problem. And just by curving it, you can see that I can find a line that separates the two. An intuition I'd like to give you that a lot of these neural networks that are at the heart of AI today, what it's doing is taking input data and mapping it into a high dimensional space. Instead of 2D, you can have more dimensions, and you can find then a plane, a hyperplane, to separate the clusters. So a lot of what happens is classification. And it turns out classification is really, really powerful to solve all sorts of problems that I'll show you now. So that was just as much, sort of algorithmic theory I'll share with you, not to bore you too much with it. It's an old idea, so why are we so excited about it right now? Well, the problem was that idea, even though it was a really good idea, it didn't work very well for a long time, many, many decades. But it began to work, and I think the year I'll give you is 2012, to be very precise. And what happened is that two other things intersected. One, it turns out that we need to have really deep networks, hence the deep learning. And to do that is computationally expensive. And there was enough power in computers by that time, especially using something called GPUs, graphical processing units, that had been developed for gaming. That clever people figured out that you could map the neural networks to these kinds of architectures and do them really well. So computing power, one. And the second one was data. Not just generic data, but labeled data. And there were data sets that scientists had collected and curated, particularly, for example, in the field of image, where there were millions of images that had been labeled by hand and were fed into the system, and it revolutionized certain fields. So what you're seeing here in the plot is, in the field of computer vision, the ability to recognize what is in an image. The error rates that were in 2010, 2011, so very recently, look at the error rates. They were 27%. The best people in the world in computer vision, that is the error rate in classifying images. Thanks to the deep learning approach to the techniques with computation and data, look what happened in 2012. It was the largest single advance in the history of the field of computer vision. The entire field has switched over. No one engineers now by hand the features of how you do computer vision. It's all done through deep learning techniques. And you've seen what's happened with the accuracy. It's just been nothing short of a revolution in the technical field. So the first message I'll give you is that a narrow form of AI finally works. And as a result of these techniques, now things like language translation and speech transcription and limited forms of language understanding, even some aspects now blending sort of old AI in terms of reasoning and logic techniques with machine learning approaches, face recognition, etc. That is what we're all experiencing, and the reason is because these techniques have finally gotten accurate enough to do.
So what we can kind of gather from this is that we've been experiencing for a long time things like machine learning. That could be, as much as a vending machine pushing D1 and getting a Snickers candy bar, all the way up to Waze and Google Maps and all the things that go on with tracking you and finding you and being able to talk back to you, where, for example, Waze tells you to make sure you take the child out of the back seat of your car when you get out. Things that shut off automatically on AT&T, for example, you set your cell phone to shut off automatically if you happen to be moving, and they can sense that. So that's kind of like machine learning. What he's talking about here is taking that steps further, where you can ask questions, and based on a generality of the question, the computer can extrapolate through AI and go find out all the potential answers that it believes are similar to or like what you're asking. So that's what this deep learning is about. The neural networks that he mentioned, very much like the brain, where you kind of you see a cat and then you see another picture of a cougar in the mountains, and you associate it with the cat. Even though there are two different animals, they are part of the same family, and somehow you associate those through this neural networks that consist of all these neurons, these axons, and the synapse, and how they all connect and work in your brain. Now, I'm not a scientist in that area, but I find this awful interesting that all of this learning that comes through these really are focused around the idea of simply collecting information, comparing it, moving on, and making a judgment, adjusting and moving on, which we're kind of used to that logic and philosophy. What the AI group is doing is creating this neural network artificially. And that began back in the 1940s. And then that leads to what he called supervised and unsupervised learning. The supervised learning obviously is where you present something that doesn't work, you present it again, it works, and you change your weights, like he called, the value that he puts on the yes or no answer, and then it learns that way to be more accurate each time. And into unsupervised learning, where it will in itself do that process for itself. You won't have to ask it. It'll do that process for itself. And so I find that really fascinating, because it's at this point you begin to see the computer take over its own learning process. And if you watch a child and you watch this process, it's sort of the similar kind of thing. The more experience, more data they take in and collect and get validated and unvalidated, the more they learn, how to say a word or whatever. And phonics is a good example of that on the children's learning side. A little basic, but the same thing. Factors that have accelerated, I think this is where we're really beginning to see the change, is where you have people, the big groups like Microsoft and Apple and Amazon and Google and Facebook, all these big corporations in America primarily, but with fingers internationally, uh, they're beginning to take this and see how they can use it to interface with the rest of the world, whether it's medical or retail or financial or whatever those industries are they're getting into. They're beginning to put this artificial intelligence concept into play. And the more they do that, again, the more classifications and information they get. Millions and billions of people are using these. So you can see how that information starts speeding up. So couple that with computing power, and then add the fact that the cost is now reasonable, like he said, you can begin to see how all of this is accelerating. Now, there's another scientist who is pretty much known as the father of AI. He began back in the 1990s. And at a TED Talk, he kind of gives an example of where this could be going to. So I thought you'd enjoy listening to him for just a minute or two.
You are a large audience by my standards. But when we started this work, decades ago, in the early 90s, only few people were interested in that because computers were so slow and you couldn't do so much with it. And I remember I gave a talk at a conference, and there was just one single person in the audience, a young lady. I said, young lady, it's very embarrassing, but apparently today I'm going to give this talk just to you. And she said, okay, but please hurry, I am the next speaker. Since then, we have greatly profited from the fact that every 5 years computers are getting 10 times cheaper, which is an old trend that has held since 1941 at least, since this man, Konrad Zuse, built the first working program-controlled computer in Berlin. And he could do roughly 1 operation per second, 1. And then 10 years later, for the same price, one could do 100 operations. 30 years later, 1 million operations for the same price. And today, after 75 years, we can do 1,000,000 billion times as much for the same price. And the trend is not about to stop because the physical limits are much further out there. Rather soon, in not so many years or decades, we will for the first time have little computational devices that can compute as much as a human brain. And if the trend doesn't break, 50 years later, there will be a little computational device for the same price that can compute as much as all 10 billion human brains taken together. And there will not only be one of those devices, but many, many, many. Everything is going to change.
So, what could be issues associated with, let me move this out of your way here. What could assist or hinder AI advancement that's out there right now? There could be more information, and more information enhances AI capability. So, you know, as the doctor was saying, the professor was saying there, think about this. There are millions and millions of people, if not billions of people, who have iPhones and iPads and computers and all kinds of different smart devices that are collecting information not just as you input it, but as you walk, as you talk, as you move, whether you have given permission or not, it appears, which, you know, is another issue, but to talk about at a different time. But for this cases, you can see collectively the amount of data that is being collected on an ongoing basis and how inexpensively that data is brought into this realm of high potent computer processing systems like Facebook and Google and Amazon and all those. I mean, I can't even purchase something over on a non-Amazon product before I get an Amazon advertisement for it on my Facebook page. So that's what's going on relative to more and more capability and more information. And the more this turns into that deep learning state, the more capacity that computer will have to make human-like decisions down the road. Computers are definitely more powerful, and they're certainly less expensive. So the AI is a platform to increase the unclassified learning. And it kind of moves AI into the realms of judgment and making decisions, strategy decisions, and other kinds of decisions. But it also might even get to the point where values and feelings could interface into that realm in a way where the computer is reacting on its own to learn and grow and build the same way children or adults do from behavior and feedback. You think about it that way. It's the capacity of two-way communication and the interpretation of that communication against your values that drive where you're going, and that can be a possibility given all of this information, and if they can get to the point where this deep learning state moves into an unsupervised learning concept where the computer learns on its own. So you heard what he was saying. Eventually, unchecked, AI could become basically a superhuman race that evolved the same way we evolved. It comes from a different direction, from a different perspective, but the concepts of its evolution are very much the same. It grows and it becomes different and it builds upon itself. The difference is it has computing issues that are associated with it. Now, there could be all kinds of limitations to that. There could be, some people go, well, what happens when the robot gets to the point where it starts deciding to do the wrong things? Well, you unplug the battery and it stops. So there are ways to check it, but there are things along this line that require us, from a leadership perspective, to think about the ethics and the morals associated with that we're going to have to deal with in a different world when you think about it. And however, like he said, this, and like the previous vice president from IBM said, we are on a very narrow path on this right now. And if you stop and think about this, really, from our perspective, we're so immersed in it because all of the companies, the 5 biggest companies in the world, are in the business of AI. Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. These companies are the ones. These are the big companies in the world, and they're all located in the United States, a more advanced society. If you think about the rest of the world, Central and South America have very little access to the internet, let alone artificial intelligence, and the cost and the income levels of those countries are so poor they can't afford to have this kind of massive computer power. at their fingertips. So, you know, when we see things on the news coming from those areas, we have to remember they are from our country. Those are normally not generated in the masses. So you don't see a large number of people in these third world countries, you know, Central and South America and Africa and many portions of the Mideast and Asia, South Asia. They don't have this capacity. And some countries that have this capacity, like China and Russia, are just highly restrictive and controlling. So, you know, how leaders are going to deal with this and how we're thinking about it from our perspective, you have to remember we're in that country where this seems to be happening very rapidly, but it's not happening very rapidly in the whole wide world. So this is not something that we should expect to see. The idea of an all robotic board of directors and CEO making strategic decisions for a company in the next 50, 60 years, maybe even longer, depending on what kinds of things might get in the way. Certainly, somewhere along the line, humans are going to fight this issue and get into the whole issue of, you know, the moral ethics of this, and that will be a bump for a while. But it is exploding at such an exponential rate in our country and in advanced countries that leaders in this country really need to take a look at how it's impacting their role out there. And, you know, because you're going to have to behave differently because this is permeating so many facets of so many industries. So I find that kind of interesting when you think about where this is going. In the future, it may not be going as fast as we think it is, but it is something as leaders we need to definitely grab a hold of now. You know, I kind of think of it as a complicated thing to solve, like climate change. You know, it's not something you can get your arms around right now and feel comfortable with, but it's there, it's real, and it's doing things, and you're going to have to respond to those things. So what impact could AI have on what is expected of leaders? That's the other question we want to ask. Let me go back one here. There we go. Let's see here. Okay. Let me just play this.
And people have difficulties to see the jobs of the future. I explain you will have maybe we are in need of, I don't know, robot polishers or drone dispatchers, but I think there are limited possibilities for such skills. Where do you see the skills which you, I mean, I think you in Alphabet, you do not have enough people. I mean, you are permanently looking for people. But where are those jobs coming from, and what skills do you particularly emphasize?
I think, look, that is a fantastic question. And I think, you know, in the sessions I've attended, you know, everybody's asking that question. I guess I would hope that as some of the, you know, maybe more mundane tasks are alleviated through technology, that people find more and more creative and meaningful ways to spend their time. I think, you know, the way you're sort of, the word job specifically, you know, has a lot of implication and a lot of, you know, the way that we might have spent the past couple of generations. Like, a job means you go to the office, like here, and you do some things, you have some papers, you have an inbox, you have an outbox, and I think so our mindset is somewhat narrow in that way, and yet we have jobs that are more creative and thoughtful, take economists, for example, which is, a hard thing to describe to a farmer.
Fortunately, I'm an engineer.
Yeah, oh, you're an engineer, sorry. Okay, we have some economists here. It is the World Economic Forum. I think...
Not engineering forum.
Sorry. Engineering is pretty easy to describe, I think, to folks. Yeah. But being an economist is not like that easy to describe. And it's not that we need 5 billion economists. But the point is that I think if you sort of continue that trajectory, you do see more and more people that have been freed up over the past couple hundred years to do work that is, more kind of thinking about things or creating things, seeking aesthetics, whether it is in an intellectual domain or a purely artistic domain. And I would hope to see that trend continue. And I would hope that the world would find, an opportunity. This is where I think education becomes very important. And I think broad education. Yeah. But as, some of these jobs are displaced, giving people the opportunity to get educated from the point of view of having actually the education resources, the financial wherewithal to be able to pursue that, like, you don't want to be, studying Shakespeare and going hungry or something like that. And being somewhat open-minded, giving people a chance to develop different skills that aren't necessarily, okay, we have 5,000 needs for this exact kind of thing today. Because probably the thing that you want exactly 5,000 of today is the thing that also is more realistically automatable. Yeah. So I think it's important for people to be able to have freedom to study, financial opportunity to study, and to get meaning. I think in addition to, work being an important way that, we exchange money and whatnot, people find profound meaning in their day-to-day jobs, and I think that's another important thing for us to preserve.
Yeah, I would say this is the key, let's say, message for me, or the hope, is that we can move from jobs which are meaningless much more to meaningful tasks. And so maybe in the social area, in the cultural area, and that will be the underlying concept for a more humanized society. But I also agree with you, we need, we shouldn't look at individual jobs now, where do we need 5,000 jobs more and so on. The key is the reformation of the whole educational system, which is completely outdated. Would you agree?
I think there are several systems that we have in place that I think for a lot of understandable reasons, they just have so much inertia, they lag behind. Education is one, and healthcare honestly is another, and I don't mean healthcare in the sense of finding the biological roots of disease. I mean, sort of healthcare systems of hospitals and, maybe insurance, be it national or employer or whatnot. These systems are just so deeply embedded from an infrastructure point of view, from a sort of governance point of view, and so forth. They're very hard to transform and to update to today's needs. But I think that is a challenge that we should seek to overcome. And within education, I mean, I just think everyone should have access to education. And I'm talking about obviously sort of primary education and secondary and university, and for that matter, postgraduate work. I mean, those things are extraordinarily expensive today for kind of artifacts of the infrastructure. We assume we need like big buildings and, fancy classrooms and things like that. And I don't think those things are necessary. I mean, it's fine to have those for some folks, but education should be universally accessible.
Yeah. When I look at, I mean, it's incredible the success of your company. And when I look at Silicon Valley in general, the success is mainly related also to a platform approach, and it's a new management concept. And of course, many people envy you because you are in this area where you have this exponential growth potential. And this creates also some, not only envies, also some, how shall I say, it's more than envy, it's aversion against the Silicon Valley model because you can grow so fast. What would be your response?
I think, look, I think first of all, I'm very lucky to have been in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is very lucky to have been able to benefit from, you know, the semiconductor boom and then software and now internet and mobile. I mean, I think it's, there's a huge amount of luck there. But the luck also comes from taking many shots. You know, so many failures. You know, if I told you all the dumb things that I did, you know, we'd have to have a much longer session. And the successes, you know, they often are chance. I mean, I mentioned the Google Brain work that they were just off in the corner. It's like, okay, fine, just, you know, do your thing. You know, Verily, which is our subsidiary that does a wide range of healthcare innovation now, really started with this glucose sensing contact lens project. And that was another one where I said, this fellow Babak and Brian Otis, who were working on it, you know, and they wanted to put a computer in a contact lens. And I was like, you know what, that sounds crazy, but, you know, you go do your crazy thing. You know, you can only have a couple people work on it. I'm not going to give you a lot of resources. But, you know, sure, if you put a computer in contact lens, good for you. And yet here they are, you know, a few years later, and they're, you know, running, you know, they're doing serious studies now. They have a big partnership with Novartis and Alcon, and they are, you know, hopefully going to bring those to market alongside with a bunch of other projects that has spawned. And I didn't know anything about that, and I never would have predicted or guessed that. I think we're just lucky to have the environment that tolerates, you know, making lots of risky bets and tolerating the failures that inevitably result.
And it needs courage. I mean, I could ask you the question I'm very often asked, starting the forum with two people. Some journalists ask me, media people ask me, did you ever imagine what is coming out? Could you ever imagine what came out of your original entrepreneurial first steps?
No, I could not possibly have imagined. But, you know, and I don't know what your thinking was behind the forum, but I remember when I was really thinking deeply about this, and this was sort of a, you know, a graduate student project at Stanford, and you know, I talked to my advisor. I was like, you know, should I really do this entrepreneurial thing? And, you know, it might not work out, and I can just finish my PhD. And he said, you know, why not? Go for it. And then if it doesn't work out, you come back, you finish your PhD, which I'm still planning on doing. But anyway, you know.
So what I found really interesting about this guy is the whole concept of the creativity side of it. When you think about it, you know, AI evolved out of this. I mean, this isn't something that somebody sat down and mapped out. It was kind of like he was talking about the guy with the putting the computer in the contact lens, you know. All of a sudden it's there. It's an idea. We don't know if it's going to work or not, but it flourishes in the world of creativity. That is the world or environment that we're shaping into. So when you start narrowing things down and you start becoming very specific in very areas, there's a real potential that you may be going down a leadership path or creating a leadership role that doesn't fit in a future AI world that's coming on us very fast. And the other thing he's emphasized is looking beyond the existing to what can be. And I thought that was important to understand about the healthcare and the other issues that he brought up that are kind of barriers, education, are kind of systems that have been like in place so long that they're dragging things down. Now, there is a difference, and I want to emphasize this. There's a difference between what a guy like Sergey does when he's in Google and that evolves. He was excited, but he was also competent. He was compassionate with his people. He cares about his people. He may, he allows them to go do those things. If they fail, he doesn't punish them for that necessarily. I don't think so on a broad scale, but he allows that to happen in a way, but he manages it. He controls it because he has the education, the mental capacity, the desire, the goal, and also the human values that are associated. I mean, I don't think he does this for money. I think he does this because things like helping somebody see better through a computer in their contact lens, or seeing it all, might be an extremely a valuable thing to them, but more importantly, it's critical to the world as a whole. And you can see, when he says education for all, he's concerned about the environment. These folks in that realm are successful because that's what's flourishing, is that environment, that culture, those values are flourishing. Hence, AI comes out of that process. So when you go in there, you can definitely find yourself bogged down if you come in with baggage that is often taught in schools today, in leadership schools. The whole idea of well-rounded education and education universally for everyone, and the idea of encouraging creativity and taking chances and tolerating failures, these are all critically important things that are out there. And the idea that you don't narrow your role to something that's the job. In other words, leadership has to start thinking about not just being the leader, but how much bigger is that? How much more is there to that? So it's a different thought process you have to have if you're going to survive in the upcoming world in leadership in the next few decades. Now, having said that, how will leaders survive in the world of AI today? What is a way that you can begin to move into that realm? What are some of the skills, so to speak, that we need to really grab a hold of and feel comfortable with when it comes to that? And this next fellow is a visiting professor with IE, and he's done a lot of work in intelligence AI, so he uses somewhat of an example to sort of explain how the interaction should be happening now as we move into this AI world. So let's take a listen to Milo Jones.
So let's look at what we might learn from Garry Kasparov, because chess, believe it or not, is a quite warlike competitive sport, and Garry tried to learn from his defeat. What sort of things did he learn? Well, after a few years of being depressed, Garry Kasparov organized something called freestyle chess, and he did it not far from here. He did it over, can I say this? He did it in Barcelona. Okay. And he got the world's best chess players, because if you're Garry Kasparov, sorry, you know some good chess players. And he knew a few people who were pretty good at artificial intelligence. And he got them all to play freestyle chess. And you're all thinking, oh, what the hell is freestyle chess and why should I care? I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there, I promise. Freestyle chess is teams of humans and computers playing against other teams of humans and computers. The rules of chess are the same, but there's no such thing as cheating with artificial help. So, to put this in perspective, Kasparov said that even if Satan himself perches on your shoulder and gives you advice about what moves to make, perfectly legal, no problem. So, how bad can AI be? It's not Satan, it's giving you advice on the move to make. And he called these teams of humans and computers playing chess against other humans and computers centaurs. Okay? After the half horse, half man figures in Greek mythology. You know, sooner or later your character is your fate and your biography is your destiny. And I'm an art history major, so I'm going to get to the Parthenon frieze at some point. So there we go. I got the Parthenon frieze. Half man, half horse. Kasparov called these half human, half machine chess playing combinations centaurs. And we can learn a lot about the future of leadership by looking at centaurs and how centaurs functioned against each other. Because let's be clear about what they are. They're teams of humans and computers competing against other teams of humans and computers. So, by the way, if you're in finance or medicine or the law or even retailing today, probably the organization you work for, in some sense, is a centaur. You're leading teams of humans and computers competing against other teams of humans and computers. So maybe, even if you don't play chess, you want to pay attention. First indication of what this might mean to the future of leadership is simply to accept that as a leader, you're going to be judging. Hold on, should I listen to the marketing centaur? They have an algorithm that's telling us we need to put more money into a magazine campaign running in Madrid this month. Or should I listen to the logistics centaur that is saying, no, 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 that same 10 million euros you were planning to invest, that needs to go into our new distribution hub in Malaga, or whatever. You as a leader are going to have to be judging the output of human-machine teams. But it actually gets more interesting than that when you consider who won this match, this freestyle chess match that Kasparov organized. Because the winner, and here we have a sort of Swiss watch diagram of who the winners were. But I want you to think back to what I said. Kasparov knew a lot of people who were very good at chess. And he also knew a lot of people who were very good at AI. But the winner shocked everybody, because the winner was this team, Zach S. And what do you think? Was it the AI geniuses? No. Was it the chess grandmasters? No. Zach S. was a team of two so-so chess players. Not so-so by the standards of Milo Jones that like is beaten by a 6-year-old, but, you know, in the world of chess geniuses, so-so. And they had 3 sort of Dell laptops, and I'm not endorsing or not endorsing Dell in any sense in this video. But they weren't using the latest AI. What did they have? What can we learn from Zach S.'s victory against, on the one hand, the AI technology giants, and on the other hand, the chess geniuses? Well, Kasparov sums it up for us pretty well. It turns out, in a world of AI, in a world of centaurs, that a human team with decent algorithmic advice, AI advice, and a good process for deciding what decisions they make versus what decisions the algorithm makes, beats not only the best AI by itself, which you might hope as a human that would be true, but it also beats objectively better players with better machines, but a bad process for figuring out what decisions they should make versus what decisions the algorithm should make. So there's some combination of process and humility implied by this that I think informs the future of leadership. All of us are facing a world of amazing possibilities, and you're hearing about some of them today. AI is going to become commonplace. Artificial intelligence is the new normal. But if you're worried about leadership, I urge you, as a former Marine, lead by example. Look out for the welfare of your subordinates. But don't think as much about raw IQ. Don't think as much about strategy. Think about process. And think about humility. And think about, hold on, there are certain moves that I simply need to accept are better made by a computer. But that doesn't mean humans are irrelevant in the process. When we're thinking about the new normal, I call your attention to a sign that used to appear in hotel rooms. All of us, 20 years from now, I believe, are going to have a difficult time imagining a world where everything isn't smart, where intelligence isn't embedded. The same way that most of us were kind of aware that there was a world before electricity, but we rely on it without thinking. And it hasn't removed our humanity, and it hasn't removed our need to do things like lead people, but it has changed things. Artificial intelligence is the new normal. And I think there are lessons in centaurs about process and humility and doing better what humans do as opposed to what machines do that you can learn if you're open-minded and not worried about AI taking over the world, but instead accepting the new normal remains human. So with that, I appreciate your attention.
Okay, so here is where I think we're coming to in the end. You know, what leaders need to do to survive with the AI. They need to embrace a new perspective about the role, a role of being creative and being a visionary and looking at possibilities versus efficiencies and money generation and those kinds of things. I think most of the people in Amazon and Google and Microsoft that all tell you they probably weren't focused on return on investment to their stockholders while they were evolving their companies. It was about being a visionary, about being creative, and about seeing things as possibilities that weren't there before. So leaders have to not, if they're not going to be there, they need to create cultures and environments that embrace that. And that comes with a strong, open, two-way communication process. You cannot have closed communication process and have creativity and visionary activities going on and promote any kind of idea generation. It just requires a lot of open communication. I like the idea that Sergey from Google was saying that well-rounded education helps ensure competence, not just the highly specific areas, but well-rounded, because when you think about AI, it encompasses all aspects of human, and we're more than just math. We're more than just science. We're about culture. We're about literature. We're about history. We're about all of those things that make us as a whole a human. And that is where the neurosystem evolves. That's where a lot of change happens in people, and that's where a lot of change will happen in AI, particularly in the unsupervised learning environment when it starts learning itself. I think a leader of the future that's going to be AI has to be, we saw this with Milo's stuff, they have to be collegial, they have to be collaborative, they have to understand where their role is, what works, what doesn't work for them, be able to give up things to other people and even to machines when it's necessary, but also understand what they do well and take and hold close to them what's important for them to do as opposed to machines, as an example. Regardless of where AI goes, and perhaps that might be sort of the battle line to be drawn, and one of the compromises to be made is as AI evolves, in it also you have to evolve the feelings aspects of the neuron system that we have in our brain. And those are the things that allow us to have compassion, to cry, to feel hurt, to feel compassion and caring and concern. It's not that we couldn't put those into an AI environment. And part of what leaders have to do is safeguard that world as we go forward in the AI environment. And then lastly, I think openness, this whole idea of not shutting somebody down because it's not your idea as a leader, or to restrict somebody from coming up through the ranks and creating something that makes them the millionaire instead of you. Those kinds of things are going to have to become part of the past in the leadership world. You have to encourage openness. You have to encourage the idea of trying the possibility of things. And if they fail, it's okay. It's okay to fail. You just keep going until you find that right thing that fits. And so if you can kind of encourage that as a leader in people, I think we'll find that leadership is going to be far, far more useful during AI, particularly the early phases of AI. Who knows where it'll end up, but in the early phases of AI, these component pieces, based on what I'm hearing from these experts we listen to, these component pieces are going to be very important for leadership in the future. So it's time to wind down our show here. I'm hoping that a lot of people were able to get something out of this. Again, if you're want to be part of what's going on with this, we want you to feel free to join us on any of the leadership talk shows that we have going, and enjoy these programs. Share them with your friends. Help them to be encouraged to be strong leaders in the future. If you have any recommendations of things you would like to see me discuss on a show, feel free to put them in the comments section. You can go over to my YouTube page. I have playlists under 3 or 4 different areas on that leadership on YouTube. Just type in Victor L Vogel. Usually you can get me through that process on Google. Just about any of the shows that I do. I hope this is helpful. I've enjoyed it. I'll tell you this, it's a wave of the future. At my age and being retired, and I won't be engaged in it near as much as some of you will be, but I encourage you to embrace some of what you heard tonight and to delve into this further. All of these presentations in their entirety are on YouTube, and the links to those will be in the video description that I repost on all of those sites that I mentioned to you earlier: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and those areas. The YouTube videos will be posted. You can also type, go to Apple iPad, or the podcast, Apple iPodcast. It's a video podcast, but it's an Apple podcast. You can type in Victor L Vogel, and you'll find the Leadership Talk Show on there, and this will be part of that also. So you can spread it around any way you like with your friends, or you can go back and look at it. And I encourage you to go listen to all these I listened to every one of these presentations and several others, by the way, but these stuck out for what we were trying to do. But they're all highly beneficial to listen to all of them. If you're a leader, you're going to need to know this in the future. So until next time, you be safe and continue to learn.